I've always been telling Ayan, in order to make sure that I can go to at least some of Somali Week, can we please have some of it at SOAS? And can I please be on the panel so that I can make sure that I have to be here? Because I have small children and it's sometimes hard to find, to get an excuse to come. So I'm delighted that you're all here, and I'm delighted to be part of this. Tonight's session is, as you know, a panel on identities and diversities, which is a really important topic and matter of much discussion now in Somali areas. I should say that it's also something that we, is a sort of the second year in a row that we've hosted something at SOAS specifically around the issue of Somali diversities, and it's partly inspired by and in commemoration of the work of Virginia Luling, who, as many of you know, dedicated her life to working on Somali minority issues in particular. And I'm sure Virginia would be horrified to know that I'm even mentioning her name right now. But I think it's worth paying tribute to her and to her really important, exceptional work. We have a really exciting panel this evening. And I'm going to introduce each of them in turn, if you'll permit me the time to be able to do that. I'm really happy to bring to you this evening our first speaker, Hussein Abdullahi Bulhan, who is an old friend of mine, haven't seen in a very long time. Hussein is one of my heroes because I'm not sure if this story is true, but I always keep this in my mind, that having been a professor at Boston University and finally received tenure, which is a very long and arduous process, he then said, "Thank you very much, I'm going back to Somaliland," and left Boston behind. And I always thought that was a fantastic move, and I wish I had the ability to do that myself. So, but Hussein has had a very long career, a distinguished career in a variety of different forms. He has a PhD in clinical psychology and master's in public health from Harvard University. As I said, he was a professor at Boston University before coming back to the Horn of Africa. He was a founding director of the Academy for Peace and Development in Hargeisa, and is the author of I should also say former chancellor of the University of Hargeisa. He's currently the chief of staff for counseling and welfare at UNAMID within the African Union UN operation in Darfur, which focuses on civilian protection. He's the author of multiple books, including Frantz Fanon and the Psychology of Oppression, The Politics of Cain, 100 Years of Crises in Somali Politics and Society, and In Between Three Civilizations, Reconstructing the Distant Past and Shattered Worlds of Somalis. So please join me in welcoming Dr.
Thank you very much, Laura. This is quite a while since I've seen you in Hargeisa. Thank you for inviting me. I just came 2 days ago from Somaliland, and I'm still trying to get my bearings in a highly urban, very active city where everybody is rushing to someplace. This is the time of the evening in Somaliland and much of Africa where you don't rush, you just sit down and talk. And we were trying to find Cham and I, as we got lost, trying to find somebody to just stop a minute and just please direct us. And everybody was like a missile, running somewhere. Then eventually we had to catch up with it and run like a missile ourselves. Well, firstly, I want to say that coming to SOAS, there are 3 colleagues of yours who are working with me, have come to Somaliland as teachers of English, and in a new university we have started called Frantz Fanon University. One is Shane, whom you know, some of you. Another is Caroline Ackley. And the third is Hannah, who also was, I think, within this university. They are very quickly catching up with Somaliland, as we had to do ourselves as we came back. On the topic of identity and diversity in Somali society, certainly it's a very broad topic, but one that is very interesting because I think that Somalis have 2 aspects to the issues of identity. One is something that they affirm with certainty who they are. No doubt about it. But there is also hidden in that, or underlying that, is a great deal of ambiguity and conflict. And that is precisely where the problems are. The certainty of identity for Somalis, compounded by the unacknowledged ambiguities and conflicts, have created a good deal of problem. And I don't think we have given it enough attention. So I'm glad we can be talking about that. Two caveats first. Firstly, I'm going to be talking a good deal about the pastoralist Somalis, because they, above all, affirm this sort of certainty of who they are and never admit to the ambiguities and certainties that come up. And they, indeed, because of these problems, they are also, first and foremost, the problems of Somali society. They are the ones who are warring. They are the ones who are conflicting over power. They are the ones who are creating a good deal of problem for themselves as well as for the rest of society. Agriculturists and the minority groups in Somali society, as we refer to them as minority, in fact, that itself is a whole set of issues, because the pastoralist Somalis, part of their self-assertion is they would never admit they are a minority in some way or another. And that also creates a problem. The other thing is that Somalis, when we hear from the outside, we see them as one unit, more or less united, perhaps one together. But then as you are a member of it, or you live within, you definitely see the diversity that is there. We use the sort of proverbial onion, one onion that is there, united, one unit. But you are one of it. You go through multiple layers, and as you peel one layer, you are crying, shedding tears. Not happy process. So these multiple layers of Somali identity comes into action when you are within that unit. Outside of it, it is as if one united group that is there acting for good or for worse. Now, the second thing is, I want to refer here as a caveat, is that in addition to the neglect of so-called minority groups, and they are not minority groups, it is just an assumption. Nobody did a census in Somali society. And it is characteristic of these clans to say, we are Landere, we are of the higher branch, we are the largest of that, and we'll talk about that. So they have not been acknowledged. But there is also equally another serious problem in Somali identity, and that is the gender issue. In terms of women, fathers are counted and recounted and retold. Mothers, there is none of it. You don't hear very much. So this sort of gender bias in the psychology and social organization of Somali society, over half of the population is not acknowledged. In the genealogy, in the relations of it. And to a large extent, we pay a heavy price for these kinds of neglect, not only for the minority groups, but also for the majority of women, majority population in Somali society. Half of our brain is non-functional. Therefore, we are not going to move forward with men who in the first place are at war with each other on presumption of superiority among themselves. I'll talk a little bit about that. Somali society, the certainties of this. First, what do I mean by certainty? Maybe I should just define that. Something that is certain not by evidence, but by belief. No evidence. There's no evidence that exists. It's a matter of belief. And we are now talking about an aspect, the reality, how we define reality, we can go about it two ways. One is from a sensory perception, something you can touch, you can count, you can see, all that. Based on, by common consent, this is the ways in which we can measure, count, and so on and so forth. But there is the mythic mode also. Myth, basically, this is what we believe, and this is what it is. That's what reality. A good deal of what we'll be talking about operates in the world of mythic reality. And there's a contest of myths that are there. One group believing in one thing of who they are, another believing something else. And so we are going to be very quickly proceeding from the sensory, countable, agreeable, or even scientific, if you want to say, to the world of myths, of what people believe. And there are basically, I think, Somalis, like the rest of humanity, struggle with issues of identity, and we always, they're not the only ones who have ambiguities and uncertainties, but all of us struggle with these issues of identity. And there are basically three main areas that work at the level of the individual, but also at the level of the collective. At the level of individual, it becomes, who am I? One way or another, it comes up, who am I? And that question inevitably involves not only the self in and of itself, but also in relation to others. Always it is in relation to others. So who am I? The second question is, where did I come from? What is my past? What is my roots? But equally important is, where am I headed to? Where are we going? So these three questions at the individual level, who am I? Where did I come from? To where am I going? Has its other counterpart, who are we? Where are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? These issues for Somalis are on the surface fairly certain. Well, who am I? My name? Okay, you don't want my name, my father's name? You don't want my name, my father's name, my grandfather's name? That's not sufficient? I'll go to my great-grandfather. I'll count to 20 of my ancestors. Are you satisfied? I can go even further. And maybe add to it, I am related to the Prophet. Okay? We are the Sharifs of the world. Okay? We are the ones who are. And this goes across the board. And you look at this ancestry that goes on from so-and-so, 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 so. It is hardwired in the psychology of Somalis. Most Somalis, I don't know in those who have grown in London, but the psychology of Somalis, they know this ancestry long before they have learned even language. It's among the first things they learn. Most people don't even remember when they learned, but they can tell you in rote the details of their ancestry. Okay. Then you move on. Of course, being Muslims, we have to find beyond the 20, 30, or whatever we count, where did we come from? Okay, of course. It just began after Islam, and we are the righteous ones who are more or less, if you did the right things, we have a special license for heaven. But then somebody says, oh, come on, you're not of that. You're not much of anything. We have our own line. And I'll talk about the concept I define as delusion of clan superiority that permeates in the psychology of Somalis. And so the contest of who am I, who are we, along with the issue of where did we come from and where we are headed. There is a contest of memories, contest of identities, and contest of who owns the future. This is precisely what we also fight. It's not only just purely material. It is a confusion that reigns supreme, and I'll say more about this. Well, with the clan identity that is certain, you have a suspicion as you go through it. The certainty in which it is affirmed, the adamancy in which it is stated, has underlying it some issues of doubt, some issues of uncertainty. When people really, and I'm, maybe going from perspective of my own training, the more one affirms it with strength, assiduously, continuously, I begin to have a doubt. Why are you going this far? Why are you telling me so much? Why are you holding to this whole thing? And there is this delusion of superiority, underlying it, horror of inferiority. I am Landere. I come from the large branch. Under it I have to put down someone else in order to keep up. But then there is the clan ethos. The clan system, when you look at it, the clan system has its own ethos. And this also creates problems. What are they? I summarize it only with 10 statements. First, Somalis believe genealogy is the key to human relations. Disregard it at your peril. If you do not know it, if you do not know those of others, you will be in peril. You must learn. That's what the culture says. That's why children are taught. Second, your clan is superior to other clans. Be proud of it. Every Somali child more or less is trained with that. Third, help and defend the clan, right or wrong. You just have to do it. 4, always remain vigilant of clan enemies lurking to take advantage of you. Enemies, there's a paranoia, somewhere. Especially the ones who are close to you are the ones who are in danger. They may be your maternal relations, but be careful. Most of all, beware of authority outside the clan. It only deceives and oppresses. So, you have President X. If he's not a member of your clan, watch out. Okay? Recently there was a big debate and I was asked, good governance. How do I define good governance? Well, I said, I know 3 ways. One is, of course, liberal democracy and elections and so on and so forth. Socialist, working class, nirvana on the road. And the Somali one, which says, if member of my clan is holding authority, is good governance. Them holding it, no. Disaster. 4th, life is hard and painful. Face it with forbearance and courage. And this one is very important. Looting other clans is acceptable. It displays bravery. That's why we have been looting camels from each other historically. And if you look at that history of camel looting, a group of people, young men, middle-aged men, go loot the other clan's camels. And once they take the camels, we are Muslims. So we have to find a sheikh who can sanctify it, who can now give us, read Quran on it, and that way, it will be clean and fair. The man who reads the Quran, the sheikh, gets the first share. The leader of the group gets the second, and then it's distributed. But if any member of the clan happens to be there at that spot when these camels are being divided, he also automatically has a share, because he's a member of the clan, and tomorrow he will help defend it. Okay, this comes later because some of the big problems, you know, Somalis have been singing a lot in pre-independence about a she-camel for can't reach nice. It was called mandek. Mandek is the one that satisfies the soul. The she-camel, this is the definition we had of freedom, of prosperity, is that she-camel is finally in grasp. Well, people who have been looting from each other camels, a camel that is owned by none, by all, which means by none, anyone who can loot it is free game. So ever since then, we were looting the state. Whoever holds it, we loot it. Okay, and it's a fair game. Those outside of it, of course, will resent it, will not like it, but they do not think that that is their camel, national camel. There's nothing nationality, it's about clan. And whoever loots it is fair game. What is owned collectively is owned by none. Therefore, appropriate all you can. Immediately gratify needs, for you might die sooner or later, sooner than you think. Work hard of necessity, but enjoy leisure every chance you get it. Delay of gratification, enjoy the moment, loot the camel, use your clan as the protection. That's the general scenario of ethos, and I may be very quickly running out of time. But let me tell you also this delusion of clan superiority. Everywhere we have this human impulse of us and them. Part of the definition of identity inevitably involves me and the other, us and them. And it took a long, long, long time for different cultures to come up and say, well, me and the other, we have to find some way of reciprocity, some way of coexistence. We and them, we have to find lots of wars, lots of conflict. Somalis have yet to resolve this problem because there is this delusion of clan superiority. I'm superior than you are by virtue of my clan. And it says like this: no census taken, none. Our clan, we are the majority. Their clan, they're minority. Fewer than us. We possess the largest and richest land. They inhabit smaller, poor land. We have glorious past. And it goes on. They have an infamous past. Nobility is in our blood, and so on and so forth. It goes up to 10. I don't want to even spend more time, but the point of it is our definition of self and of the group is bound up by putting somebody down, rather than finding a framework of reciprocity. It is the kind of Hegelian master-slave dialectic. I get rid of you if you do not acknowledge me, but if you acknowledge me and you keep on living, I need your acknowledgement, but I put you down. These are some issues that continually assail Somalis, and much of the history of the last 30, 40 years is one clan usurping power over another. All the efforts for democratic governance that we are struggling with, we're making some headways, certainly in parts of Somali society where at least people have said, okay, let's continue this clan struggle and contest of memories and histories, but at least let's put down the gun. Let's just put down the gun. I mean, that has been a very important step. And then also coming up and saying, well, besides the gun, let's just find some ways of contesting, through some modes of election, imperfect as it is. And so we elect in Somaliland, in Puntland, leaders in Somalia. There's an effort, an attempt. But Somalia is, in my view, as other Somalis, they would have found some solutions on their own. But it has been very, very complicated by interventions and multiple interventions in the name of assisting it, which today leaves it in a very sad situation where people are caught up by how do you really negotiate these internal struggles Somalis have everywhere with the external infusion of forces and dynamics that are there. In any case, we are making some headways. The guns put down, at least we don't kill each other in action. We may do that in fantasy, continuously. And we could also say, let us now compete through some kind of elections. And I've been there for many years through these elections. And we are fine once the matter is settled. Few years later, election time comes, and these delusions and mythic issues come to rise with an immense intensity. As transition time comes, you will see our mentality going up. I think my colleagues are here looking at probably the time, but there's one last point I want to say. The other complication that comes up is that for some reason, we have all these ancestors we count somehow end up to the point when Islam came to our land. And so you begin to say, do I believe we are Arabs as claimed? Because we are preferring to say Arabs. And if we were Arabs only 800 years or thereabouts, this whole nation has come up. Then you look at the growing genetic history records, you look at issues relating to DNA, you look at the language, Somali language, the history. And this Somali who says, I'm an Arab, I'm a Sharif, I'm all of these stuff, also says, we are from Puntland, Puntland. Yeah, Punt, the land of Punt, the pharaonic time. My history goes all the way back. How are you going to reconcile? You're saying you just came in 800 years ago, and yet you're saying I've been grounded here. That's also another complication. So our even genealogy has been abbreviated because of commitment to Islam. And we have also forgotten the fact that our language is Cushitic language. The evidence is quite clear. And if those who proselytized the religion had come, they have been overwhelmed by the population that was there all along. All along. We have been there much longer, and we have actually cut short our own history and genealogy as Somalis. And so one has to look at that distant past, the language, the culture, the linkages we have had with populations within the Horn of Africa and beyond. And this is, to these days, very dangerous to be talking about that in at least in our part of the world. You are saying we are not good Muslims. No, I didn't talk about Islam. We are good Muslims, as good as anybody in the world. We are not foreigners to Islam. We have been among the first who have become Muslims in the Horn of Africa, not with force and arms. But what I'm saying is, the Nigerian, the Indonesian, the Malaysian, the Turkish, so many other nationalities are also Muslims and good Muslims, and we have no reason to deny our identity and our history in our own land. That's part of a confusion that is there. And last, I think maybe we'll discuss. There was one guy who he sent his genealogy. You know, this is National Geographic, you can send your, swap and then find out your genetic history, at least where you come from. Because of the current conflicts that are going on, the gentleman is in the States, he decided to find out where he came from. And so somebody said, hey, please don't open that Pandora's box. You may come up with something, So he said, no, I want to find out. And he sent it. So they told him, with this sort of Somalis now divided into territories against each other, totally. And so he's in territory A. And the results came and they told him, by the way, you are related to someone who is in territory B. The last thing he wanted to hear. And somebody told him, didn't we tell you this is Pandora's box? You are not really genuine from group A. You came from B. The other guy, because they send you this information and then they send the other person and say, by the way, if you want to contact, that person is there. The two of them didn't want to contact. Absolutely none. And so what happened is, then came later an Egyptian who happened to have some bonding with the both of them. The report came and said, by the way, this Egyptian gentleman also has the same kind of genetic history. E1B3 and all of this sort of classification. The two Somalis who didn't want to contact each other contacted the Egyptian, both of them. And the Egyptian said, to hell with you, Africans. I'm not an African. My God, this is a hell of a confusion we are in. We want to look across the seas, to find identity and linkages, deny each other, to live and to acknowledge each other, and therefore not to have peace with each other. Unless Somalis go deeper into the conflict of their identities, acknowledge the diversities, and find means of reciprocity with each other, or with one another. And furthermore, and very importantly, begin to look at over half of the population that is no longer part of their history and memory of the women, the mothers, the sisters, sort of lobotomized, brain cut off half. Unless that is also resolved, I don't think we are very well close to any solution. And so-called minorities, because I believe that term itself, because they are not even counted, there's no census. This group are across all Somali territories, at least the ones I know. They are not only in one region, they are across borders. They span different places. Unless we do that and we acknowledge them, we are not going to get acknowledgement with one another and freedom with one another. Women and then the minorities. Thank you.
Let us now turn to our next speaker, Ilwad Elman, who is the Director of Programs and Development at the Elman Peace and Human Rights Organization in Somalia, which is chaired by her mother, Fatun Adan. And the work that they're doing is very much carrying on the work of Ilwad's father, Elman Ali Ahmed, who was a quite famous and celebrated but had far too short of a career in peace activism. Ilwad is, I should say, tonight's session is co-sponsored by the Center for Migration and Diaspora Studies here at SOAS, and so I think it's really appropriate that all of our speakers tonight are, in a sense, both engaged in events inside Somalia, Somaliland, but as well come from the diaspora. And Ilwad returned to Somalia 4 years ago from Canada, and since then has co-founded the first rape crisis center in the country, working with survivors of rape and other forms of gender-based violence on the rehabilitation of child soldiers. And she's been active in a number of nationwide and international advocacy campaigns and sort of advocacy platforms, too numerous to mention, but maybe a couple of them to mention are that she was one of the youngest selected for the Washington Fellowship, which was a flagship program of President Obama's for young African leaders, has also been really active in the TEDx Mogadishu series, which is now had carried on events in successive years. So we're really happy and really lucky, I think, to welcome Ilwad, who's come from Mogadishu to speak to us tonight.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I'll start by saying thank you very much for coming to this event. And I should mention I'm probably the only non-scholar on this panel, so my remarks will be a lot more briefer and based on my observations and focusing predominantly on the south and central parts of Somalia. So I was born in Mogadishu, Somalia. I left when I was about 1.5 years old and sought refuge in Canada. My situation is not unique and something that most people can identify with, fleeing the conflict. And when I decided to come back to Somalia and work there and try to help in reconstructing my country, that also is not something unique that's happening right now. Especially in the recent years, we're seeing a huge, huge influx of diaspora returning back to Somalia. When I was asked to speak on the topic of identity and culture, I had to think about that first, what it means to me, before I even entertained the idea of speaking to an audience about it. So I let it marinate and sit in the back of my head as I just lived my day-to-day in Somalia. And what I was observing was so many different cultures becoming harmonized into one. You have to acknowledge the growing presence of the diaspora in Somalia, and then also the locals that are there. The two are influencing each other, and it's something that's undeniable. It's not uncommon to sit in a restaurant in Mogadishu or in Hargeisa or in Puntland for that matter and hear almost 5 different languages being spoken around you. It's not uncommon to see locals that have never left the country before wearing similar attire, enjoying cuisine that diaspora now have found in new establishments, and you're really seeing the mix of the two cultures. And it's not uncommon to see people that have been abroad for almost 30 years now moving back in rural parts of Somalia, raising children that were born abroad because they want to just be very much back on ground, back in home as they recognize it to be. What we're seeing now is definitely a harmonization, a melting pot of the different cultures, but I think this is made possible because as Somalis, we have certain aspects of our culture that act as a cornerstone. They act as the bridging factors that always remain in whatever region within Somalia we may reside or whatever country in the greater world we do come from. There are certain cross-cutting aspects of the culture that we share, and these dominating commonalities that we share allow for us to also integrate and include new ways of living into our own. But on the other spectrum of the diaspora coming back and mixing with the locals, what we're seeing too is that there's a growing demographic of the diaspora who are romanticizing a culture that used to be in Somalia, a culture that now no longer exists. And this is, of course, because there has been, in many parts of Somalia, war and suffering. So a lot of these things that they're romanticizing and remembering don't quite yet apply anymore. This demographic is the one that most publicly contests the extent of Arabic language, patriarchal culture, and conservative Islamic dress that we're seeing in many parts of South Central. They are also the ones that are challenging this by promoting more of a liberal lifestyle, opening establishments for like-minded peoples to come and to gather, and the idea of that is to make more of a movement for the old Somalia, to come back. But it's not recognizing everything that's happened in the last 2 decades, and because of that, it's met with a lot of resistance. Ironically, this is also the same demographic that widely denies the magnitude of the sexual and gender-based violence that's happening in Somalia. Again, looking back on a culture of where women used to be free in Somalia, where there was no war. And as we know, rape is a weapon of war. So by still very much romanticizing this culture that we used to have before the war, they are the ones that predominantly dismiss that women are as oppressed or as victimized as they are. Acts of sexual violence usually go unpunished in Somalia or are dealt under the customary systems, whereby perpetrators are not individually prosecuted. Instead, a solution is worked out between the clans, and which either results in a small transfer of funds or some sort of small mediation. And I think it's quite interesting what my colleague before talked about, where he discussed looting from other clans, whether it's livestock or whatever, it's acceptable. Within my work as a human rights defender, I'm working very closely with survivors of sexual violence. One thing that I've seen in this regard is that rape is sometimes acceptable, depending on which clan the woman comes from. There's been situations where we've tried to pursue legal and justice systems, but the answer that we actually got in a body of court in Mogadishu was that we didn't know this woman was from clan X. We thought she was a minority clan, as though that justifies that it's okay to happen to certain groups of people. Stigma attached to survivors of sexual violence is extremely high, of course, in Somalia. And girls who fall pregnant because of rape, they often end up having clandestine killing of the children as well, too. In some cases where justice is initiated, the woman has to marry her perpetrator. And again, this is very much breeding into the culture where that if a woman has been raped or a girl, she's damaged now and nobody else wants her, so it's better to match her with her rapist as it would be to just leave her free and alone. This often leads to a lifetime of suffering. So we have many different cultures right now in Somalia too. The culture of silence, the culture of stigmatizing people who are already victimized, the culture of justifying that sometimes these atrocities are valid and should happen based on who that person is or who their affiliation or their clan is. So culture, I mean, it's a way of life. It's what makes us unique. It's what we identify with. But it's important to recognize the limitations and the harm that can come from cultural practices. Practices that have become the norm for so many years that no matter where Somalis travel to all over the world, they still carry them with them. And within my position as a human rights defender, again, and with the work that I do with my organization, I've personally seen young women or young boys and children being sent back to Somalia for what we call dhaqan ilis, or forced cultural reconnect. But sometimes the solution to solving what is considered to be a young person that's grown up in the West or in Europe that's become too submerged into a foreign culture is to bring them back to Somalia and then expose them to more challenges and violations, grave violations. So you're seeing young girls being forcefully married off to men 30 years their senior. This is not a situation of the family not knowing better. This is not a situation of needing that petty dowry. It's not. It's about feeling like in order to bring this young woman back on the right track, on the right path, let's take her back all the way down, get her back to her roots, to her culture. So in my capacity within the organization, we've been successful in returning children and young women that have escaped these situations back to their countries of origin. But it is definitely a testament as to how far these things travel with us. We've also been very successful in supporting young men who are sent back, again, for this forced reconnect. But what we're missing sometimes is what are they being returned back to? What are they being sent to? What environment? If we want to teach our children our culture, it should be guided. It shouldn't be just tossing them back out into Somalia, because what they find often is even worse than what they were fleeing in the first place. So you have young children that have lost, they don't have the identity who can't fit into either worlds joining groups like Al-Shabaab. Or their families are bringing them to Somalia, leaving them, but giving them money at their disposal, and they're being attracted to things they otherwise only fantasize about, like the gun culture, which is so readily and easily accessible. So it's not uncommon to hear a young man speaking perfect English or having a nice European accent sitting at a checkpoint with an AK-47 in his lap and chewing khat. Why is that? Because his parents think that they're sending him back to Somalia to learn about his culture. The Somali culture is diverse within and outside of the country. It will continue to diversify as we continue to go back to Somalia, as more of us continue to travel outside, but it's important that we can actually sift through what is good about our culture, what is unique and what's distinctively us about it, and not further perpetuate the challenges and the harmful practices that are within it. So I think I'll leave my remarks to that, and thank you.
Again, I think we have a lot of things we can come back to in the discussion. Our final formal speaker is Dr. Omar Eno, who's a multilingual scholar and poet. He teaches interdisciplinary studies at Atlas University of Somalia, and he's also an adjunct professor of African history at Portland State University in the US. He was formerly the director of the African Migration and Development Research Program at Portland State. He was centrally involved in securing the resettlement of about 14,000 members of the Somali Bantu ethnic community from Somalia, from refugee camps around Somalia to the U.S. during the early 2000s, and is now involved in the establishment of Atlas University, as well as several different research projects, which he may tell us about this evening. He's the author of many different scholarly works on Somali society. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Omar.
Good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Omar Eno, and I'm now based in Somalia, helping the Ministry of Education revive the National Somali University that collapsed some time back. And also, I have opened in a joint effort of a university called Atlas University in Somalia. And I was told to announce it and say that that university is the first university for the minorities. I have been going to Somalia. Hassan Sheikh wanted to appoint me minister several times. I refused. And no, I'm not accusing. He's a good man. He's a very smart guy. I had a long discussion with him. But I just don't want to be in politics. And the situation is that whenever I went to Somalia, I sat down with cross-clan minority students, and I asked them, you are always pushed aside as a minority, even though we'll talk about it. Nobody knows who's majority and who's minority. And they said, we come from very poor family. We cannot afford to go to university. We are stuck with a higher school diploma. And some of them could not even retrieve their diploma certificate from the ministry because you have to pay $30. They don't have the $30. So there were 200 scholarships that came. None of the minorities participated because they don't have the diplomas to show, because they don't have the $30 to collect the certificate. And they are very intelligent, very smart, talented. I paid for 10 of them. I wish I could pay more, but my hands were tied. Anyway, there's Atlas University of Somalia. Whoever is here, who is from the minority, from the majority, from whatever you are, please let them know that if a student cannot afford to go to other universities in Somalia that are paid highly, we look sponsors for them, and if they are intelligent, if they have higher grade, we accept them, we put them in the university. I leave that one there. I don't think you are going to be happy with me, but let me start. According to Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it says, in those states in which ethnic, religious, or linguistic minorities exist, persons belonging to such minorities shall not be denied the right in the community with other members of their group to enjoy their own culture, to profess and practice their own religion, or to use their own language. Is that happening in Somalia? Ask yourself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have not come here to praise Somalia and Somalians. I have not come here to insult Somalia and Somalians either. Some of you may not like to hear the sordid details of Somalia's hollow homogeneity, when in reality, they are distinct communities that are overtly and heartlessly discriminated. Therefore, my positions will be clearly stated, and I hope we shall have enough time to debate dialectically, and I underline, I don't want, and it's not worth nonsense debate. Dialectical debate is what I'm looking forward on some of the issues that I'm about to raise on minorities, particularly the Bantu Jarir, the Baydari, Gaboye, Barawa, Banadiri, and many other ones. Ask this question to yourself. If Somalis are homogeneous, same culture, same language, same tradition, same whatnot, same everything, why are we so divided and so uncompromising, so irreconcilable for the past over 2 decades? Why? What is the difference? If we have everything same, what is the problem? Another major myth that Somalia is suffering from is as he mentioned, my colleague here, is a superiority complex. In other words, they adamantly deny, they adamantly in denial of being identified as Africans. Subsequently, this created a Somalia that is in Africa, but not of Africa. I quote Casanelli here, Levi Casanelli. He says, the myth of the culturally homogeneous nation, a myth which seemed to set Somalia apart from most of other African states, will have to be replaced by a new model that recognizes the significance in recent Somali history of divisions of class, color, occupation, and language. These societal divisions are not necessarily immutable, but analysts can no longer afford to ignore them if they seek to understand the contemporary crisis in the Horn of Africa. You cannot deny anymore. Therefore, in reality, Somalia is a nation that holds together people of different cultures, different customs, different traditions, different language, and different values, different destiny. However, they theoretically share the Islamic religion of Sunni sect. By the way, being diverse does not mean we cannot live together. We can. Being diverse does not mean we can't find a modern and flexible system that respects our differences. We can find. We can live together and we can be diverse. There are countries like Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda. They have 50 tribes. They have 50 languages. And they are a nation. They are intact. They are together. They are working. So why do you deny my language? Why do you impose on me your language? Why? If you want to kill a society, I have seen this in the US and Canada, you first take away the language. When you want to kill a culture, you take away from them the language. Then that culture is dead. You know why? Because you are adopting another language and you are always told, no, you are not the master of the language. Stand behind. Because you adopted this language. It's not your language. So many young men in my country, in Somalia, they have been robbed of their culture. I was in primary, I don't know if we have time to finish this. I was in a primary school. I went to register. There's this old man that came, he's a Rahawin, wrongly called Rahawin, but they are Rewin. There is no Rahawin. He came to register his son at the same school. Me, I was already registered, but we are just standing there. So he doesn't speak another language. He speaks only the Rewin language. Is that a crime? So the headmaster, he said, I want my son to be registered. I am here. I was living somewhere else, so I moved now here in this area. This school is near to my children. I want to be registered. And listen what the headmaster answered. He says, "War Somali baan wax u la'nahay." You're laughing now, but what does he feel, this young kid, at that age of 5, 6 years old? Let me translate. An old man came to register his son in a school that he moved in that area, and the headmaster tells him, because he was speaking a different language, it's a Somali language, but different, but the headmaster didn't understand. Now the headmaster answers the father, look at him. We can't get spaces for Somali children. And he's asking for space. So who is he? Where did he come? He's a Somali. So if I tell you the historical background of what happened to me and what happened to my brother, which he all registered, his book is called Unearthing Apartheid in Somalia. You can't believe. When my brother graduated from primary, all the teachers, all the parents were invited there, and my brother was number 1 in the school. The headmaster was Ustad Abdullah. He was half Arab. And Ustad Abdullah, then children are given their certificate, they called their name, and the parents are there. My brother was called, and he went to get his certificate because he scored all 100. 100, 100, 100, 100. So the headmaster said, this is the kind of student we want. This is the kind of student who will help tomorrow the country, the whatnot and whatnot. And an old parent stood up and talked to the master and said, war hadda ma waxaadna leedahay caruurteen oo dhan ma addoonkaasaa ka badiyey. I knew you will not like it. You see, my brother scored 100 in every point because I am a Bantu. My brother is a Bantu or a Jarer, whatever you want to call it locally. So a parent from the dominant clan Somali says, he told the headmaster, are you trying to tell us all of our children were defeated by this slave? Because we are considered a slave in Somalia. Not only we, every African Negroid-looking person, if your nose is big, if your hair is kinky, you are a slave. I don't know who owns me. I'm looking for my master I don't see yet. So, let me go back what Ali Jim'ale says here. Professor Ali Jim'ale, he's talking about Somali intellectuals. He says, he describes Somali intellectual. He says, there is always a tendency among Somali intellectuals to hunt for the unnecessary rather than examining things and ideas on merit. For me, he says, for him, therefore, an intellectual of any sort is the person who, he's quoting Gramsci now, it's the person who assumes that the purpose of discussion is the pursuit of truth. Now, he continues, such an intellectual is one who attempts to identify problems, reflects on them, and does not shy away from asking hard and unpleasant questions. I didn't shy away, I explained. And who suggests, not imposes, some type of solution to the problem under his or her scrutiny. So he concludes and says, therefore, I would argue that an overwhelming number of Somali intellectuals are simply university and college graduates. Because education which does not bring about a transformation in the consciousness of the educated is hardly beneficial to the individual, let alone to society. If you are educated and the education is not bringing any transformation in you, you still go back to your tribe. You still go back to the nonsense of calling me, or Adon Batai, Bidda Batai, which I don't understand. You see, but like now I'm not called Adon because I'm a professor. Everybody knows there's a little resource around me. Everybody will come. Now I'm removed from Adon to Adonhood. Now, we're Sudan way. I'm Sudan. I'm not Sudan. Adon. So, therefore, here I think the Chinese proverb I picked is very handy here, is useful. It says, to know and not to act is not to know. If you know something, you don't act on it, then you don't know it. So, I wish we had enough time. Now, this is where I come to the character, which I think Burhan, most of it he covered. I thank him. It's the first time I meet him, and I heard about him and I read, but I never met him. The character of a nomad or a pastoralist is to disdain agriculture. Not only that, to disdain any manual job. They don't want to do anything that involves handwork. How do you progress? How do you develop? You tell me. These missiles that are being sent, this technology that is happening among the Japanese and all this, do you think it came because of Gabay? No. It started with a hand. And now I am doing the handwork. You insult me because of doing the handwork. Kabaha lagu tolay. Borsa lagu sameye. You respect the Italian who makes the shoes and the handbag. But the one who is with you, who's a Somali who makes the shoe, the knife, the metal, you derogatively abuse. Ask yourself, are you intelligent really? We will come to the intelligence. So we leave that one there. Now, Somalis fit in Africa. There's a book, there's an article we wrote in a book, me and my brother. It's called Who is an African? I removed a clause from that article which we published in that book. Somalis deny Africanity. They do not want to be identified as African. They want to be Arabs. And the Arabs are pushing them. There's a dilemma here. You see, there's identity crisis here now. I don't have identity crisis. I'm an African, and there are so many Africans in Africa. I don't have identity crisis. You can call me whatever you want, but I have identity. You do not have identity now because the Arabs have refused you. They are telling you, ya abid. And you're better off to accept me as your brother rather than going to an Arab. So we called Somalis in that article Africanity by accident of geography. This group consists of those who happen to be in Africa without their wish to be there. Individuals who found themselves living in the continent by virtue of circumstances beyond their control. In other words, circumstantial Africans. Members of this group are not pleased to be identified with negritude or blackness, be it by value, ideology, culture, ethnicity, or any other quality except by the accident of being in Africa, of existing on the continent. So, the only time that a Somali nomad or a pastoralist, and I have nothing against nomads, the only time he or she will accept to be an African, or she or he may instantly turn around from Arab to Africa, is if she or he encounters discrimination of identity, denial from that group. And I have seen this in Egypt. I have seen it in Saudi Arabia, and I have seen it in Canada. I'm a Canadian by, naturalization. You see? So in Canada, they come to complain. I was teaching at York University in Canada. ورنا على عبودك يا قال هذا والله مثل كلا الصع. And I tell them, welcome to the real world. In Canada, I used to teach at York University. Some of my students, they come to me and they say, Prof, these white people, they discriminate us. This is not right. I said, yes, welcome to the real world. Because I have training for discrimination. You gave me. Back home, you gave me that training. To me, this piece of cake. I never felt even single day in Canada that I was discriminated. Never. Because I was already prepared by you guys. Okay. People from all over the world do view diversity as strength, except the Somali nomads, who consider it a divisive culture. According to Van den Berge, this guy is, I think he's a Belgium. He says, cultural diversity is a necessary condition of human evolution and advancement. Normally, within a homogeneous society, the people are supposed to get along wonderfully since they all share the same culture, tradition, language, and religion. However, as the Somali situation conspicuously shows, being homogeneous or claiming to be homogeneous society did not save the country from plunging into the abyss of annihilation and anarchy. Instead, many diverse communities, as I told you earlier, they are together. Tanzanian 50 language, Kenyan 60 language, and they are one nation. They are living together, they are moving ahead. While we are stuck with this is my what, this is my language, I am better than you. Imagine when Somali language was being written. They all picked from the nomadic group, those who wrote the language. And look how they underestimated other languages. When they found a word that does not exist in the Somali language, they went to borrow it from Arab language. What about the other languages who exist here? Maybe they have that word. Why don't you respect and borrow from them? I am hoping you guys are students and intellectuals towards intellectuality or academia. I hope you will change your way of thinking. Because if we continue this way, what is happening there, we are doomed. Believe me. I wanted to give you the history of the Bantu, but I don't know if we have time. You see, there are two groups of Somali Bantu in Somalia. Those along the Shebeli River, both banks of the Shebeli River, and those along the Juba River. Those along the Shebeli River were there even before the Somalis came. Those along the Juba River are those who were duped by Arabs, Omanis, into slavery. They brought as a cheap laborer at the beginning, but when they brought them into Somalia, they were turned into slaves. And that is why they ran away from slavery and established their own polity in Gosha, around Kismayo area. When they ran away, their intention was to go back to their country of origin. Originally, those in the Gosha, they are from Tanzania, Malawi, Mozambique. Arabs brought them, Omanis. Said Said, who controlled the whole coast. I teach history. If I start this, I will not finish. So you see, there are these two groups of Somalis. One is native, and one came. Now, because they look alike, you all lump them. All they are Adomo. They are all slaves. Those along Shebeli River, they were not slaves. They had nothing to do with slavery. But because now somebody has the power, somebody has took over the government, immediately after the Italians left, I wrote a lot here on that, but I don't think I have enough time to cover. So the Bantus fell victims, those who are even natives. Now this is the question I start in my PhD thesis. I start with 7 questions. Then I answer those questions. One of the questions is, you told me I am not a Somali. I was brought here as a slave. You are an Arab. You came here. And the country we are talking is in Africa. And I am the African. Isn't here a dilemma? I am the African who is in Africa. But you are the Arab who came. And now you tell me I don't own this country. It's not mine. And I am the African. So who came here? Is it the Arab who came or the African who came? This is one of the questions I start with my thesis. So, you see, it is good to study. It's good to go to school. Because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have been able to talk to you like this. Because I remember in Toronto, University of Toronto, it was a Somali Independence Day. And we were talking about Somalia. There was a forum like this. and a Barawa man said, we are talking of Somalia, we are talking of this, we are talking of government. Our women were raped and they were taken to somewhere in central area. Up to today, we don't know. They are in central region. They took the woman and they went with the women in the central region. Now he says, me, I want my children to be brought back. Somebody who was sitting at the back, because there is no space to walk, and the guy who's asking the question is in front. So that guy, he's one of your cousins or brothers, he stood up. And he says, warya, war ninka sida u hadlaya dadkiina horay taagan miyaadan la idinku arkin nin qura oo ninka dharbaxa. Look the ignorance. This is not a place to slap somebody. There's a security guard, he will throw you out. There's no gun here. I talk the way I want. I tell you the truth. It may be painful, but it is. Swallow it. Unless you want to change. I don't want to marry you. I don't want anything. I married Indonesian. You see? Because there is this cultural belief that a Jarer or a Madiban or a Gaboye, he cannot marry the other Somali group. Why? Why can't he marry? Oh, sorry. Tell me, why can't he marry? What is the reason? In my had the gursishadaas dankala ku jirto. Dankala ku jirto. No. What? Weligoda that fiicnay ahaayeen. Weligoda, they were good. They were good always. Aniga, I was mar aan lecture ka bixiyay University of Minnesota. Some girls proposed. Why are you complaining? Are you ready to marry? I said, no, I'm not ready. Now you want me, yeah. Because I'm a professor now? I'm okay now? Now, yeah. Now, why not? There's something now. But when I was suffering in Barak Abdo and Bull Ally, you didn't want me that time. No. And I'm not stupid enough to embrace you now. No. I will take my resources whoever deserves. Come on. So, I messed my writing. So the thing is, I think let us conclude this thing because of time. I think we don't have enough time. We have to stop this thing. But I wish there was enough time. Huh?
It is vice versa now.
Yeah, it's vice versa, but I still don't believe it. That is the problem. Now, this is how he... Wow, isbedeleen laakiin waxaan ku arkay, I saw it in Toronto. All Somali girls are befriending Jamaicans. And Somali men are getting angry. They are getting mad. I tell him, why you get blood pressure for nothing? Because he cannot go and threaten a Jamaican the way he threatens me at home. A Jamaican will spill his brain out. You see the reality? Why Somali? That gets him we are Jamaican. Why can't we stop them? Why don't we stop the Jamaicans from our girls? You stop from me. I'm your brother. I speak your language. We grew up together. We went to same school. You underestimate me. But the Jamaican, you cannot go near. You see? So you are coward, in a way. Okay, now let's finish this. This is what Sharif Aydrus said when he was reading a paper. I'm concluding it. He was reading a paper in the Canadian Parliament. I took a section from his paper. He says, "It is our duty to educate the misinformed that we are not members of the same ethnic, linguistic background. It is also our responsibility to correct past mistakes and be proud of our diversity. Accepting the status quo is a violation of the Charter of Human Rights and Freedom. But the bottom line must be clear. Our right to our own identity, integrity, and ethnicity is a sacrosanct. Inclusion of false homogeneity is not absolute. We are not going to accept genocide to our culture, dignity, ethnicity, or language." Now, the last sentence. We, the minorities, by the way, nobody knows, I told you, I found in France, archive, a statistic that was done by United Nations in 1940, before independence. That time, we were majority. As he said, we were majority that time. But when Somalia got independence, every buffoon who became in charge claimed to be the majority. And Siad Barre did statistics. You remember? Tirakobka Umada. People were counted. You know, Siad Barre had another image. He thought they are going to be majority, all the other what. Then when the results came, he was shocked. That statistic research was not revealed. So you can claim majority, one day it's going to haunt you. Now, we the minorities have a positive and a progressive vision of how Somalia should be. With your help, all of you, and contribution from your area of expertise, we would like to turn this vision into reality.
It's pretty hard to follow that, and what anyway can some white guy do talking about Somali identity after hearing from a prestigious panel like this? So probably I should have declined to be discussant and just stuck with being co-host or something like that. But anyway, for better or worse, here I am. It's also very difficult being a discussant on this topic, even where I'm not preceded by the people I have been preceded by, because the topic of identity is really, really difficult. It's a difficult one because it's so slippery. As soon as we start trying to identify what we mean by identity, we start losing ourselves in a discussion about exactly the kinds of things that the speakers have just been talking about. So I want to just go through a few of the points which I felt were, to me, particularly interesting or pertinent for one reason or another. And I want to go back to start with to Hussein Bolhan's comments at the beginning about the fact that Somali identity is based on two paradoxical things. One is certainty and the other is ambiguity. More problematically still, the certainty is based not on certainty based on evidence, but certainty based on belief. And that's problematic because you have, in the end, a certainty of belief and an ambiguity of evidence. I'm extending a little bit here, but I think that's a reasonable conclusion to draw. And that leads to a lot of the situations that the other speakers have been talking about. So just as Ilwad was talking about the tendency in Somali culture to romanticize a historic Somali identity or culture that never existed, one that denies gender-based violence today, that denies the victimization and oppression of women, that is precisely a culture and identity that is made possible by that contradiction between certainty and ambiguity, and where that certainty is one of belief, not of fact, not of evidence. And I don't mean belief in the sense of religion. I mean belief, I think, in the sense which I'm taking it Bulhan was talking about. It's a belief as in a certainty within yourself that is not necessarily touched by the facts, the numbers, whatever. Which takes me to the last point that Omarena was making about the issue of counting. And that's very pertinent to me because as someone who has been involved in Somaliland in particular, but Puntland a bit, in the political processes, in Somaliland looking at elections and election as a coordinator of election observation, observers, the issue of counting is very pertinent. The attempt in 2008 to count voters was a disaster. And it was a disaster precisely because of the things that these people were talking about. It's a disaster because that counting process threatens to do what the Siad Barre-sponsored process would have done had those numbers been released. It changes the balance of power, and it changes the nature of the identification of people as to whether or not they're minority or majority, whether they're bigger than their neighbor, whether you're bigger than the clan down the road, down the way, or whatever. And that's very problematic. But I don't want to concentrate on the problems because there's another aspect of identity which is all about what Somali Week is celebrating. And that's that Somali identity has a huge amount of strength, a huge amount of vibrancy, and it supports and is supported by a culture that is extremely rich. And I think it's very important not to lose sight of the good. It can be very difficult to untangle the good and the bad. And I think that some of the problems that were talked about are precisely that. It was Omar that was talking about education that doesn't bring about transformation cannot be seen as being beneficial to the individual or the society. Well, one of the transformations that I think probably education can bring is using education in the widest possible terms, in terms that I think are pertinent to Somali Week and perhaps are more pertinent given that we are now enjoying this session within a university. It's an education that takes a broad remit, that looks at culture, understands culture, tries to interpret it, tries to take from it what it can, but understands it as a set of traditions that are reinvented, constantly reinvented. The reinvention of tradition being one of the features of it. So that idea of the romanticization of a history or a culture that wasn't there is something that can be challenged precisely by the education that Omar was talking about. I don't want to talk for a long time. There's a huge amount that we could talk about, but actually I think the most interesting thing now would be to have a bit of discussion. I think given the reception that the previous speakers had, it was pretty clear that you guys would like to interact, would like to take part in that discussion. So I'm going to leave it there. The points I want to make are really the ones I've already made. The pertinent points about the contradictions that lead to negatives, but also the positives that can be taken from the sense of identity, the sense of culture, these traditions, these practices that make you as Somalis what you are. And that means Somalis as, in terms of the whole breadth, the heterogeneity of Somaliness, not the homogeneity of Somaliness. So abandoning, hopefully through education, hopefully through cultural expression, the myth of homogeneity. So I'm going to leave it there, and I hope that we can have a very vibrant discussion. I think we have time to do that.